The topic for today is how defense in depth will save your business. And we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, data loss, and how organizations can improve their cyber defenses. Today, I'm joined by SnapTech IT Director Chuck Wiley. Chuck, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, well, let's, one thing we like to do just right at the top here is spend 30 seconds talking a little bit about who SnapTech is in case you don't know who we are. We are a cybersecurity first IT service provider with operations in Atlanta, Georgia, Phoenix, Arizona, and San Francisco, California. Our point of view is that technology should solve problems, not create them. And what we come across a lot of times is organizations are really struggling with either productivity or cybersecurity issues that really impact the productivity of their people, the happiness of their workforce, and their ability to grow their company. And we want to be there as a resource to help you solve those problems. The way we do it is with a proven process. We work with our clients and follow a methodical process to help you improve your IT posture and cybersecurity posture over time, maximize your technology, make your people productive, and achieve peace of mind, especially on the cybersecurity front. The way we do that is we really try to work with clients in two fundamentally different ways. If you're a smaller organization and you don't have an IT department, we deliver fully managed IT to your team. So we really look after everything for you. If you're a larger organization and you have an IT manager or IT director or even a whole IT team, we also do what's called co-managed IT, where we can partner with your IT department and we take on certain functions of the IT stack and help you from an outsourcing perspective while turning your team into heroes so that they can go do the more interesting or sexy work on the technology front. And that's co-managed IT. So what we're going to be talking about today is defense in depth and cybersecurity. And if you're on today's webinar, you probably have some concerns about the current posture of your organization from a cybersecurity perspective. You're probably wondering, are we doing everything we can be doing? Are we up on all the current threats? Do we have the right technology assets deployed? Are we following the right processes? This whole concept of defense in depth might be new for you or your team, but we're happy that you're here. We're going to try to educate you. Chuck is going to share some war stories really from the trenches. Day to day, Chuck and his team are managing kind of the most tricky and complex escalations that come our way, the biggest technology challenges that happen day to day. So Chuck is every day out there fighting the bad guys and helping our clients defend their environments. And so he's going to bring real stories to the table here. And I'm going to make some introductory remarks about what we believe defense in depth means and how we go about doing that for our clients. Chuck's going to share some examples. Chuck's going to share some examples of real stories from some of our client environments of where defense in depth really made a big difference. And then we're going to wrap up today's session talking a little bit about cyber risk assessments. How do you actually perform a cyber risk assessment? How do you hire somebody to do a cyber risk assessment, and why it's wise to do so? And then just talk a little bit more about the details of that. And then we'll take your questions. So any questions you have as we go along, use the Q&A feature in the GoToWebinar application. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today. The whole concept of defense in depth is not a new concept. If there's any military history buffs out there in the audience, or anybody who's a fan of medieval history, or a fan of maybe fables that talk about castles and that sort of thing, these things are entrenched in our minds, in our folklore, but they're real. Like if you look at a medieval castle, the reason a medieval castle became a place where a knight or a noble or a duke would put all of his gold and put all of his soldiers was because it was a great way to defend the high ground, or defend the kingdom, or defend his kingdom, because these castles really had defense in depth. So if we just take the example of a real castle, there's rings of defenses, and those rings of defenses are going to keep the bad guys out and give the defenders a good perspective of the whole field of battle, and allow them to attack the enemy from above, and to keep the people and the riches of the kingdom protected. So if you just look at a traditional castle, of course, it's got a moat. There's a drawbridge, which can allow you to bring in reinforcements and then quickly close the gate when the bad guys arrive. There's thick castle walls that are impenetrable, forming a perimeter. There's watchtowers that give you visibility down onto the enemy. And then there's rings of inner walls. So if one of the walls gets breached, you can retreat to the inner walls of the castle and still, defend the castle. So this concept is not new. If any of you guys study World War II history, or World War I history, a lot of the different combatants in those wars really took defense in depth to kind of a higher level in modern warfare. So it's been with us a really long time. And when we think about just normal physical security in our modern world, if you think about a home that's in a gated community, there's layers of defenses. So let's just talk about what those layers might be. First of all, somebody might elect to live in a gated community because they want that extra level of protection. They want a watch guard or a watchtower out at the far perimeter, keeping the bad guys out, keeping the burglars out. Neighborhood watch is neighbors banding together to provide advice and oversight and to keep an eye on each other. In the cybersecurity world, and Chuck can maybe comment on this later, that in the cybersecurity world, there's a lot of collaboration between the different cybersecurity vendors and service providers like SnapTech, where we share a lot of information about what's happening in the threat ecosystem. So that's kind of our neighborhood watch on the cybersecurity beat. Street lights are giving us more visibility. We have cameras to record what's happening and to take action. You might have a fence around your house. You have locked windows and doors, which form an inner perimeter for the home. You might have an alarm system that has sensors on all the windows and an alarm company monitoring those sensors. And if something happens, to call either the security company or the police to come and stop a burglary that's underway. And then you have motion detectors sometimes inside the home, because sometimes some clever burglar might be able to breach the outer door of a house and somehow evade detection, but the motion detector is going to capture them inside. And then, of course, if the worst case scenario happens and the bad guys do get in and they steal things, or they damage your home, or they burn the house down, or whatever, you have insurance. And last but not least, if you're in the home and there's a home invasion, you have your karate lesson. So really, defense in depth is a real concept. We live it every day. And as business leaders, we need to be thinking about our cyber defenses in the exact same way. That the best way to safeguard your organization, safeguard your employees, safeguard your trade secrets and your intellectual property and your assets is to have a defense in depth strategy. If you look at the cybersecurity world, defense in depth has been a concept that's bandied about for decades, really. And the reality is, you used to kind of think about the traditional company would have, everybody coming to an office building. There would be a headquarters location. Many companies would often have a data center or a data room in their own office building where a lot of the servers were. And you could think about kind of defense in depth in this very simplistic terms, where you've got an outer perimeter. You've got your network, which connects everything together. You have your servers and computers connected to the network, and then you have your applications and your data. And you want to harden each layer of that environment. The reality is this is not the most sophisticated way to look at an organization today, because what's happened? Well, a lot of infrastructure has moved to the cloud. So organizations will have applications and infrastructure that's spread all over the globe, hosted in cloud environments. Companies are highly distributed today. The pandemic only accelerated the trend to remote work and teleworking. So employees work wherever. And so we can't think about defense in depth in these simplistic terms anymore, because the world has changed to a great degree. And the way we at SnapTech try to think about defense in depth today is to leverage a cybersecurity framework. And there's many different cybersecurity frameworks out on the market today, but a cybersecurity framework is a list of best practices or controls that you can put in place in an organization to maximize your levels of protection. And that's what a cybersecurity framework is. We happen to like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. NIST is a division of the federal government. It's kind of the R&D arm of the US federal government. And one of the things NIST does for industry is they publish really detailed frameworks and guidelines for how to do things right. And the NIST cybersecurity framework is designed for commercial organizations that kind of go everything from small businesses up to, I would say, mid-enterprise organizations. NIST also publishes more advanced frameworks like the NIST 800-171, which is designed for defense contractors, anyone dealing with, the intellectual property around the defense industry. And the Pentagon, that's what the Pentagon stipulates, so that there's different cybersecurity frameworks, some of which are more advanced. But we really like the NIST cybersecurity framework because it's really scales down to a small business, but is also robust enough to go all the way up to mid-enterprise type organizations. And in the NIST cybersecurity framework, it identifies kind of different layers or practice areas that companies need to think about in terms of their cyber defenses. The first category is identify, which is you can't defend what you don't have well defined. And believe it or not, there's lots of companies out there. Your organization might be suffering this. Many organizations have a really hard time having really solid cybersecurity because they don't even know what they have. They may have applications and assets and computers that aren't inventoried correctly. They don't really know what their users are working on. And that's a huge problem, right? And so the first real category of the NIST cybersecurity framework is identify. And it's having all of the procedures and software tools in place so that you really understand what you have and you can control it and can manage it. The next layer of protection is called protect. And this is the area that I think intuitively most people think about with cybersecurity is, the most common protection measure that's been around a long time is antivirus running on an endpoint computer, right? So a lot of the different measures that we put in place in the cybersecurity world are around protection, which is, if you think about it, it's the stuff we put in place to build a perimeter or to keep the bad guys out, or to protect data in a certain way. But I think the important thing is that many organizations have adequate protection, but where they're really lacking is in the categories of detection, response, and recover. So detection is more about, if you go back to that analogy of that home that we were looking at, the protection is the gate around the house, the doors and the windows for the house, to keep the bad guys out. But what happens when somebody gets inside the house? If somebody breaks into a door, how do you know they're actually upstairs, stealing your wife's jewelry? I don't know, right? So the way, that's where the motion detector comes in. And in the cybersecurity world, there's a whole host of different technologies and practices you can put in place that give you kind of that motion detector type experience on a company environment. And so you want to be able to identify that a bad guys, the threat actors have actually breached a user, compromised a user, compromised a system, and you want to be able to quickly quarantine that environment and to kick them out before data gets stolen, before they're able to move laterally to different systems, or to start to commit financial fraud. So detection is super important because it's all about the speed with which you can respond. Response is the category of, do you have business continuity plans in place? Do you have plans on how you would respond to a disaster or to a cybersecurity incident? And then do you have the abilities to recover? Do you have data backed up? Do you have data backed up with all the different places it lives? Do you have a technology that allows you to rapidly recover environments, recover data and get it back into production, or recover whole systems, recover them in the cloud if there's a site-wide disaster, all these sorts of things. So this is the way we think about the cybersecurity world and having layers of protection. So it's a more sophisticated way of looking at it than maybe the age-old way that was kind of perimeter working in. And so that's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And what I want to do is share with you a little bit what we call our cybersecurity tech stack. And these are some of these items are things that we do because they're best practices or they're good policies and procedures and controls. Others are simply technologies that really do a really good job of either protecting an environment or detecting that there's a problem. I'm going to go through this pretty quick, but what I want it to show is that at each one of these kind of layers of protection, we have a robust set of procedures and technologies that we deploy to our clients to give them defense in depth. So in the area of identify, I'm going to talk later about assessments, but we are big believers in doing an assessment of an environment, whether it's a brand new client to us or an existing client that's been with us for years. Doing assessments periodically helps you to understand where do you stand today and where do you need to get to. We're big believers in process and documentation. We leverage a tool called IT Glue, where we do detailed documentation of all of our client environments. Every single one of our clients, we have what we call hire fire forms or onboarding and offboarding procedures that are customized for the clients. We leverage something called ConnectWise Manage, which is our professional services automation tool, which gives us really robust insights to all the different players and users inside of an organization, all the different tickets and issues that might be being worked. And we also do dark web monitoring, which is, looking for potential compromises of somebody's email or their credentials that might show up out on the dark web. So those are all things we do in the identify category. In the protect category, we leverage remote monitoring and management tools. We, of course, do managed firewall services, leveraging unified threat management firewall devices from Sophos. We leverage Microsoft Defender to defend the email infrastructure of an organization. We put really what's called next generation antivirus or EDR onto all endpoint machines, so all Macs PCs, servers that go into an environment, and we happen to like the Sophos product lines. We leverage zero trust network access, which is really modernized VPN technology, and we like a company called AppGate. So we could go on and on here. So in the protect category, we obviously have a lot of things. In the detect category, one thing, this is an area where we're often asking clients to step up to more investment. These are areas where clients often have gaps. Because they might have a lot of protections in place, but they're not necessarily thinking about, well, what do you need to actually detect? If we go back to that analogy of the motion detector inside of a home that's been broken into, these detect technologies are the things that are kind of like our motion detector to allow us to see if there's anomalous behavior happening inside the client's environment. So things like Sophos managed detection and response. This is where we partner with our vendor Sophos, and it gives our team an additional team at Sophos that's looking for anomalous behavior that could be happening in an environment, because today it's really anomalous behavior where the bad guys are often using valid technology tools inside of an environment, but they're using them in such a way that's a little odd, and we want to detect that anomalous behavior and go rapidly investigate and find out if something else is going on. So that's what Sophos MDR allows you to do. SaaS Alerts is a product that we put in place that's monitoring the cloud and SaaS applications of a client, like the Microsoft 365 environment. And then all of this data is fed into our Security Operations Center, where we're able to rapidly respond to security incidents and take action. And that gives us the ability to do incident response. There's other aspects of readying your ability to respond. That's why you would do pen testing. That's why you would do tabletop exercises to beef up your muscle mass, if you will, and your speed with which you're able to actually, in an organized fashion, respond to a security incident. And then if the worst case scenarios happen, if there's a major outage at a client, or there's a ransomware attack and that sort of thing, we're big believers in investing in world-class backup technology, and we happen to partner with a vendor called Datto, which is owned by Kaseya, and we deploy Datto on everything that's important. We put business backup and disaster recovery devices and business continuity technology into an environment where we're protecting servers, critical workstations, and we're put Datto in place to protect like the cloud data that a client might have in Microsoft 365. So we're big believers in defense in depth, and I've given you kind of the meat of what actions we would take or the various technologies or methods we would put in place to give a client a very robust level of protection. So with that, I'm going to hand the ball off to Chuck. Again, I want to remind you, if you have questions, use the Q&A feature. But now we're going to turn things over to Chuck, and he's going to talk about real life examples of where clients maybe could have had more protections in place, or they did have multiple layers, or we put in place multiple layers of defense, and it really saved the day for the client. So Chuck, take it away.
All right. Thank you for that, Ted. So the first story that we'll dive into, I call it the outdated computers and no country blocking. And I'll start it off with this. And Ted, you let me know if you've run into this before, but have you ever stumbled across malicious activity while you were troubleshooting something that was maybe routine? Maybe it's a computer restarting and you just see something odd, could be a pop-up. Has that ever happened to you?
I'm normally not resolving tickets for clients. I'm usually doing the sales and marketing stuff, but I can imagine it happening.
Yeah. So, we were onboarding one of our larger co-managed clients, and we encountered what appeared to be a simple routine RMM agent deployment. So RMM is the tool that we deploy to all the machines and workstations and servers so we can see if they're up, down, and everything about the environment, part of our asset collection. However, as I dug into a little bit more, I saw something alarming. It was my client dedicated account. It was showing me that I was logging in between the hours of 2 and 5 in the morning, which sometimes I might be doing that, but in this case, I wasn't. I am known to work late. It happens. What can I say? But it wasn't me doing this at this time. So that definitely raised some red flags there. A little bit more about the client. The client was particularly concerning because they were still running unsupported operating systems. We're talking about Windows XP, Windows Server 2003. Our endpoint protection at the time didn't officially support 2003 servers. They were called legacy components. And these two older systems that were unsupported by Microsoft, they were mixed in with production systems. They were all on the same network, talking to each other. So to complicate matters even further, our essential security recommendations, so we did an IT discovery risk assessment, and then we had a list of recommendations that, based on what we saw, these are the things that you should do first in a certain order. But one of those recommendations was country blocking or geo blocking from the perimeter, right? We want to, if you're not doing business with people outside of the US, then you want to block their ability to access your infrastructure. So that's what the country blocking is for. We haven't implemented, at this point for this client, we hadn't implemented their firewalls yet to be able to do that. They were still running some pretty old and outdated firewall equipment. So it left them exposed to external threats. So as I continued the investigation, I uncovered there was multiple accounts. It wasn't just my account. It was other individual accounts that we used to log into the client's infrastructure. It was other clients' administrator accounts that were being used in hours of the day that weren't normal. So once I found that, it was hinting at the B word. For those that are unfamiliar with the B word, it refers to a security breach. So you never want to say that officially. You always want to call it a security incident. Don't ever say the B word. It's kind of a running joke. But you don't want to say it because there is liability involved. There's some legal matters, depending on the company you're dealing with. And you definitely don't want to document it in a ticket saying that's a breach unless you know for sure that's what it is. So I needed to collect more information to validate what I found, because now I'm seeing something suspicious, but now I need to make sure it's not something else, maybe a tool we put in place. So I quickly reached out to our endpoint protection support team to do some further investigation. What we discovered was alarming. Malicious, obfuscated code was running on servers and workstations. So when I say obfuscated code, what does that mean to you, Ted?
I mean, it's code that maybe looks on its surface like it's legitimate, but it's actually doing something harmful.
Pretty close, pretty close. Yeah, it's almost to the point where you can't read it, you can't understand it. It's like looking at the Matrix and you see all this stuff, like it's code, but it just doesn't make sense. That's how the threat actors hide their attacks, right? They change their code around so that your endpoint protection, if it's looking for a specific word, it can't quite see the word because it's obfuscated. So once we saw this was definitely a red flag. So the incident revealed that we had significant gaps at this point. We were still in the middle of onboarding the client. We were still in the middle of implementing remediations. So we didn't have our full tool set out. So we had an internal meeting and we strategized the next steps. In the internal meeting, this was SnapTech, right? We have our client and this is SnapTech's internal meeting. We are adhering to our own incident response policy, so SnapTech's incident response. Then we notified the client, and with their permission, we collaborated with our SIM vendor. And our SIM vendor at the time, they were amazing. They overnighted equipment, we call them sensors, to us so that we can get them installed to the client. And having a SIM is like having eyes on everything in the environment. You point all of your logs, everything that you have to your SIM. So it's a centralized system where you can quickly put clues together and figure out what's going on. So they assisted with us, or they assisted in getting us that equipment and helped setting up their tenant and their environment. We got the sensors installed at the data center and we were good to go. We also engaged our incident response partner at the time, and we coordinated with our endpoint security vendor to implement the latest packages to all of their endpoints. We even got them to support the Windows Server 2003 servers. They gave us a specialized legacy client. Although limited, it gave us some visibility as to what was going on in those servers. I want to give the client some credit here. It wasn't that they weren't implementing our recommendations. I'm sure everyone's pretty, well aware that when an IT discovery happens, there's a list of remediations or recommendations that need to be implemented, but you can't quite do them all at one time, right? You have a budget, there's certain things you want to do ahead of others. So it wasn't that they weren't implementing our recommendations, it's just a priority of the way we're implementing stuff. It just happened to match up perfect in this scenario. So what happened? All right, after engaging the incident response vendor, we met with the client and assigned out tasks confirming the nature of the threat. What were we dealing with? Because now we have eyes on the environment, we can see what's going on. Our investigation revealed that we were dealing with an advanced persistent threat, specifically Carbanock Fin7. Have you ever heard of them? No. So, organized crime gang, if you will. They're known to go after retailers, banks. They're after credit card information. Also, the FBI became involved. So the FBI had recently dismantled a malicious threat actor's operation, and upon them reviewing the data that they got from that, they found our client's IPs listed among a bunch of other businesses that were compromised. So now we know that we have an APT. It's a financially backed crime organization called Fin7. We got the FBI involved. So now we had to go out, or the client had to go out and get the best legal team that they could get. And then they also brought in, based on the legal team's recommendation, one of the best incident response companies, which was FireEye at the time. So got to work a little bit with them. So with the resolution, so with the SIM solution operational, we gained visibility into the client's, into the APT's activities, and we devised a strategic plan to mitigate that threat. As we were going around and we were looking at the incident, it became clear that the outdated systems, the absence of country blocking, significantly heightened the client's vulnerability. The source of the attack ultimately was traced back to an employee's BYOD MacBook device. So it's their personal device that they had. It was a MacBook, but it was running a Windows virtual machine inside the MacBook. And he would connect with that machine into another office that was completely separate. They weren't supposed to be connected in any way. And at this office, this is where they had POS systems. This is where they do credit card processing. Well, they were able to monitor his interaction and his connectivity and use that to get over into that environment to steal credit card information. It was a massive, massive operation. So what was the takeaway for this? Well, the experience underscored the critical need for robust cyber defense in-depth strategies, including removal of unsupported operating systems, Server 2003, which now we're at Server 2012, right? It's no longer supported. Windows 10 is coming up in October. If you can't get rid of these old systems, isolating them from production systems is a good idea. Regular updates, centralized loggings, having a SIM in place or an MDR solution, and implementing access controls like country blocking are essential. Again, if we go back to that castle, there's different layers of the security and measures that you could put in place to make it difficult for an attacker to get into your environment. So by layering up these multiple security measures, organizations can enhance their resilience against sophisticated threats like this APT been said. So,
okay. All right.
That's that story.
Super. Yeah, let's go to the next case study. And again, if you've got questions, please drop them in the Q&A log, and we'll hit Chuck up with those questions.
Okay, so the next one is redundant firewalls, redundant ISPs. So I don't know if anyone is listening in, if they carefully made a plan and went to go execute that plan and it failed and you just ran into issues. However, because you had redundancy in the environment, that actually saved you. That's actually happened quite a bit. So with this particular story, it was time to update the client's firewall, their firmware, get it up to date. I think there was a critical vulnerability at the time. So we scheduled through change management, and I'm curious how many of those that are listening, if you actually have change management in place, if you're using that to do your maintenance, your upgrades, global changes to the environment. I'd be happy to see some of that. But we put in a change request to upgrade their firewalls on Friday. Because we've upgraded their firewalls before without any major issues, we were pretty confident nothing bad was going to happen. However, in our change management process, we do have a little line that we ask, what is the rollback plan? So if something does happen, how do we get them back up and running? So it's very useful, especially if you're not the one implementing the changes and someone else has to. So since the client also had two firewalls, so they had redundant firewalls, high availability, we weren't really as concerned about this. So we got the change request approved, and we proceeded to do the upgrade. Did the upgrade, both firewalls went off at the same time. The client's entire network went down, no one can get to the internet. Luckily, it was scheduled after hours, so that was a good point there. But immediately I headed to the client site and I ended up shutting off one of the firewalls, leaving the secondary up, and that got them back up and running. There was something that caused an issue with the firmware, and it just caused both of them to turn on at the same time, and they were fighting over the internet connection, which was causing the outage. And then it's going a little bit technical, and Ted stopped me if I ever do get too technical, you know I do that. So, but anyway, that's what happened, brought the client down, wasn't expecting that, but I went on site, was able to get them back up on their secondary firewall. The primary firewall was toast, would not boot back up, would not work, it was gone. So the next day, we started receiving alerts that now their primary internet was going offline. So something was going on with that circuit. It just happened right the next day, right after we had the issue with the primary firewall. So fortunately, the client had a diverse primary and a diverse secondary internet connection. So they're diverse as in they're not the same, it's not Comcast and Comcast, it's, AT&T and Comcast or something like that. But fortunately, they had a backup internet connection, so they didn't really notice anything. We were able to keep them running on the backup internet connection. Everything continued to operate well until Monday morning when the primary internet connection came back online. So if the client had solely relied on a single firewall and we had that firmware issue happen, they would have been down. We would have had to have scrambled to get some loaner equipment or figure out a way to get them back online, or they'd have to wait for the RMA to come back in. Usually that's going to be next business day overnight, so there'd be some significant downtime with that. But fortunately, they had a backup firewall and was able to keep them online, no problem. They had a backup secondary internet connection, so when the primary internet connection went off, their secondary internet connection kicked in, and they were good to go. So despite the challenges, we recognize the redundancy in their setup played a crucial role in maintaining the business continuity. We still needed to address the issue with the primary firewall, so we submitted an RMA to replace that. So after we got the RMA process, we got the new equipment, we installed the replacement firewall, we did some testing, made sure they were back up and running, everything was good to go. So the experience highlighted that while technology sometimes fail, having redundant systems in place can actually be a lifesaver, protecting businesses from potential disruption. So Ted, there was a client that we recently onboarded, and I had the opportunity while I was in Phoenix to go on site and see them, see how things were going. Well, our primary contact there stopped me and told me, he said, hey, because of the dual internet connections, dual firewalls that you put in place, we had an internet outage the other day and we didn't even know. We didn't know until your service team called us to let us know the primary internet connection was down. And that's perfect. That's exactly how you want it to go. You want it to be seamless, not impacting your production, everything to continue operating.
All right, super. Let's go to the last case study, last example.
All right. So this one I call phishing and business email compromise. So how many of you on this webinar are concerned about encountering a situation where a single click from an email leads to a major security incident? What if there's nothing to click? So let's dive into this story. So for our clients, generally we recommend implementing multiple tools. So again, defense in depth, right? Not just relying on one tool. We have multiple tools to kind of monitor the environment. I look at this, if you go back to the castle and you have the watchtowers, I look at this as having, two different tool sets that's watching over everything, right? They can give you early signs, early alerts to what's going on. So we recommended multiple tools to alert our SOC team of suspicious logins from the client's SaaS products. A lot of companies are moving their internal infrastructure out into the cloud. A great example of a SaaS product would be Office 365 or G Suite. For this story, the client had Office 365, and with Office 365, we have a baseline of standards that we implement for all clients, where we make sure that we strengthen the Office 365 tenant in this example so that you can only access it from within the United States. So we typically put that into place, and then some clients might have some exceptions where maybe they do business with a company in India and they need to allow that. But we put this in place. Well, in this story, we received an alert from our NDR solution regarding an unusual login attempt. So after investigating this, we discovered that the impacted user had fallen victim to a phishing attack by scanning a QR code that was in an email. So this wasn't a link that the user clicked on. This was actually a QR code. It looked like a Microsoft email, and it said something along the lines like urgent. That's a key to look for. If anything has some kind of urgency to it, it should raise a red flag, but it was urgent. You need to re-enroll your device, scan the QR code. Well, they scanned the QR code, it took them to a malicious site, they ended up putting in their credentials unknowingly, and alarmingly, our primary tool that we recommended to implement, it didn't catch it. And this was because we were going through some optimizations to lessen the amount of false alarms that we get from users logging in inside the United States. Anyhow, the secondary system, the MDR solution, actually caught it. Their SOC services, so our MDR solution came with its own set of SOC, or their own SOC, right? And they effectively filter out a bunch of the noise and they escalate to us what they deem as critical. So this was one of those. It was an anomaly. It didn't look right. They identified the suspicious IP and notified our NOC team, and they confirmed that it was actually coming from a data center, and that's how they picked it up. Usually a user is not logging into their email from a data center, and that's what rose the red flag. We reached out to the user, we confirmed that they were impacted or that they fell for the phishing trick. They gave their credentials. We helped secure their account, reset their MFA, we pulled audit logs, we basically turned it into a security incident. We identified two takeaways. First, relying on a single tool led to vulnerabilities. You can create your own vulnerabilities. In this case, having both our primary detection tool and our secondary MDR solution allowed us to catch the compromised user before the issue escalated. Second, it highlighted the urgency for security awareness training. This is another layer of defense. We tried many times for this client to get them to implement security awareness training, and unfortunately, they declined it. And any client or any company can decline it, right? That may be a risk that they choose to take. But in this case, this would have helped. Had the user been informed or more informed about phishing emails and QR codes, this may have not have gotten to this point. So the situation did provide critical opportunity to emphasize the importance of such training, preventing phishing attacks, business email compromises. The other takeaway for this, the experience reinforced the value of a layered security approach. There's in between that, we could probably spend an hour of just different tool sets that you could implement along the way to make it even harder for that phishing email to get there in the first place. But this is what we mean by having cyber defense in depth, is having all of these layers to make it more difficult for a threat actor to get into your environment or to compromise one of your users. That's
okay.
It.
All right. Well, Chuck, thanks for sharing those fantastic examples of where defense in depth really were critical in helping our clients avoid, worst case outcomes with some of these incidents. So to our audience, where are you today? You may be aware that, some of the measures that Chuck talked about today, implementing a SIEM, having managed detection and response, having redundant firewalls, redundant internet connections, implementing a security operations center to actually look over your environment. You may realize, well, those are things we're not doing today. And we understand that it's complicated, that all of these cybersecurity measures involve technology, they involve people and services, and they involve investment. And you've got to do a thorough job of looking at the potential risks to your environment, and then balance that with the costs and the investments you need to make as an organization to improve your defenses. So we know it's challenging, and we hear it all the time from our clients and from prospective clients. People tell us point blank, they say, every time I turn around, I feel like there's another cybersecurity solution I've got to put in place. So like, what gives? When are we ever going to get there? And we understand, we empathize, but it's a journey. And there's no like final destination where you're not going to have to continually reevaluate things and keep an eye on things. You have to be on your toes. I think as Chuck shared some of these examples today, the threat actors are incredibly sophisticated. The stakes are super high. It's the financial downsides in some of these incidents could be very large. So you've got to just keep that in mind. And so what we want to conclude today is just talk a little bit about what we do about this particular challenge of how do you manage the risk, And it really comes down to doing an IT discovery and cyber risk assessment. This is something we do with all prospective clients. Um, there's a couple different kinds of assessments we do, but our most common one uses the NIST Cybersecurity Framework as the benchmark that will measure you. And we've obfuscated or redacted any client information in any of these slides. But what I want to quickly march you through here in just a handful of slides is some of the outputs that come out when we do an assessment. So when we do an assessment with a prospective new client, you'll actually get a score, a risk score. And in this case, this client has a pretty low score. And you see that the areas where they're really lacking, there's a lot of challenges in the identify category, but there's almost zero things in the detect category. And there's very little in the respond and recover categories. This is not uncommon. We talked about it, that normally clients will have a handful of things in place and a lot of these other things missing. And so one of the outcomes when we produce an executive summary for a client is this kind of numerical based, graphically rich view of where you stand from a risk perspective. And then the next question is, what do we do about it? So at the end of every one of our risk assessments, our VCIOs will come up with a list of recommendations on how we can go about raising the bar and getting you on a roadmap to a better posture down the road. And this is an example of, when we're talking to a prospective client, of course, one of the options is, hey, start doing business with SnapTech, because you'll have people like Chuck and his team, looking after your environment and taking proactive steps to improve the situation. And so this is an example. So often we'll say, okay, we'll do an onboarding project. And when we onboard you as a client, you see down below on this slide a list of all these different measures we're going to implement as a matter of course for you being a SnapTech client. We're going to put in place patch management. We're going to put in place SaaS alerts. We're going to do backups for your SaaS environment. All of these baseline measures that are going to substantially raise your score from a cyber defense perspective and help you mitigate a lot of these risks. And then what we also do is we map, okay, if you do all of those things, if you become a client of ours and you do all that list of things, here are all the elements of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework that we're going to be able to turn from red to green once we take these measures. So we map the measures we're recommending to the risks that are mitigated that come from the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So we give you that level of detail so you actually understand what are these specific items that are going to allow me to raise the bar and improve our posture. And then this is actually a screenshot of what the actual quote would look like. Not to confuse things or make things too messy, we're not talking actual pricing on these things, but what you see often is the way defense in depth works its way out in terms of the economics for the client is, client would choose us as their managed service provider, and that's where they would pay us to be their MSP on a monthly basis. We call that our Snap Simplicity program. One thing that almost all new clients of ours, embrace really at the end of the day is that there's additional software tools we need to put in place in the environment. So for this particular client, we're putting in better managed detection and response. We're putting in application control. We're implementing SaaS alerts and dark web monitoring. So there are additional software costs that your organization is going to bear to have a higher level of protection. But we're going to turn around and manage all of this on your behalf. And then you see over here on the right that there's often what we call remediation projects. So these are not exactly hair on fire, like must solve things, but they're like the lowest hanging fruit, the projects that are going to make the most sense for the client when they're new to us, that are going to make the biggest difference for this client. So in this case, this client, we really were recommending that they put in place cybersecurity awareness training. We also recommended doing a hardening project on their Office 365 or Microsoft 365 environment. And they also happen to have a burning need to have their phone system migrated from RingCentral to Zoom Phone. So this just gives you a flavor of how defense in depth works its way out in like real services and real projects and real technology that we would deploy to a client. And then where do you go from there? Like we said, it's a journey. If you feel like you need to do a better job managing your risks, you got to assemble your risk management team. That means you need your IT provider or your IT team involved. You need senior management involved. You need key operational people. You need to get everybody in a room, and you need to have a project to look at your cyber risks. We highly recommend you hire a third party to do a risk assessment on your environment. It could be us, it could be somebody else. Whoever it is, they should be leveraging a cybersecurity framework. And then you need to consistently evaluate your position, at least annually, after you do a cyber risk assessment. And then over time, you need to build a culture of security and risk management. If you're going about it in a methodical fashion, in a systematic fashion, you're looking at the dollars and cents, you're looking at the real risks. This is a journey that's going to make a huge difference for your organization. And so, if we kind of go back to our defense in depth analogy, the house, your home is your castle, if you will. And for an organization, if you're a leader, you need to think about beefing up your cyber defenses and managing those risks in a layered and in-depth sort of way. And hopefully today's conversation gave you a lot of food for thought and some tactical next steps you and your organization can take. We do invite you to, take some concrete next steps. If you would like to have a cyber risk assessment performed, you can go ahead and snap this QR code. And then we are going to be doing a webinar next month on cybersecurity awareness training and how that works and how you can benefit from that and what the experience will be like when you deploy that sort of technology. So that's another opportunity. Keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for the email we're going to send you. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's conversation around defense in depth. Chuck, thank you very much for sharing some real stories from the trenches.
Yeah,
things you've seen over the years.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, and we look forward to having you join us on our next monthly SnapTech IT webinar. Thank you and have a great day. Take care, everybody.